Thank you for taking the time to view this video. The topic to be discussed is the existence of God and the evidence for it. The overwhelming number of people in the country in the United States believe in the existence of God, but there is a growing number of people who would describe themselves either as atheists, believing wholeheartedly that there is no God, or agnostics, which would be the people that indicate to themselves or to others that they don't believe there is enough evidence to support the belief in God. So what I would like to do is at least present some of the fundamental reasons to believe in God for your own edification, but also so that you have that evidence to present to others as well. What I'd like to start by doing is I'm going to share some slides, and one of the first ones that I'm going to share is just a brief presentation relative to apologetics and why apologetics are important. Apologetics meaning defense.
Apologetics is, well, you can call it a pre-evangelism. God using your well-reasoned answer as a springboard or opportunity to share the grace and truth and life that only Jesus Christ can bring to the human heart. But it's also post-evangelism, and I want to underscore that for just a moment, Frank, because I call it post-evangelism in the sense that in a world in which so many things go wrong, often the swirling winds and waves of doubt beat upon the house of our faith. And so I call apologetics a pillar and a post that we can cling to in the midst of the storm. We can always go back to the reality that God created the universe, that Jesus Christ is God, and that the Bible is a reliable authority. So when doubts come into the mind of even Christians during trauma, they can go back and cling to those posts.
Yes, and the time to build a strong house is before the storm arises. And that's what we do. I mean, you may be cruising through life right now, you're a Christian, everything's going fine, and you have no doubts that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible is true, that Christianity is true. But then something happens in your life, whether it's an argument that comes your way, or it's a crisis that comes your way, which you should expect if you're a Christian, but paradoxically, many Christians don't expect it. They expect everything to go well for them. Whatever it is, you need to be grounded in the truth and know why it's the truth. Not just have this superficial kind of emotional feel that God exists, because a lot of kids, I'll tell you, go off to college with nothing but feel-good emotionalism, and when they run into a college professor who is bent on atheism, and he gives what seems like good arguments against Christianity, they're left defenseless, Hank. I mean, somebody put it this way, the easiest way to get picked off in a war is to not know you're in one. And many Christians run off to college not knowing they're in a war, or just go out into society not knowing they're in a war, and then something happens and they're left defenseless.
We were talking about UNC Charlotte at Chapel Hill. I mean UNC Chapel Hill. Professor Bart Ehrman.
Yes.
He has become world famous. He's developed a cottage industry, writing books about how the Bible is filled with not only errors but intentional lies, as he puts it. But he's particularly proud of doing the very thing that you're alluding to, and that is causing the faith of many of his students to waver. He says, and I'll quote him, he says, some students resist for a long time, secure in their knowledge that God would not allow any falsehoods into a sacred book. But before long, as students see more and more of the evidence, many of them find that their faith in the trustworthiness of Scripture begins to waver. His contention is, in the end, most, if not all, evangelical students walk away from the faith.
Yeah, they do, and he's trying to make them do that. But I found, Hank, it's not just intellectual reasons. Quite frequently when people go off to college, there's a number of factors that conspire against belief in God. You go off to college, you don't want to do everything your parents said. You see the opposite sex for the first time, you're independent, you want to do your own thing. You don't want to be seen as the Bible thumper on campus, right? You want to fit in with everybody else. And so there's a number of emotional or moral factors that conspire against belief in God. The young woman you mentioned in the beginning of the program that I mentioned in the book, who left the faith after just 4 weeks of going to UNC Chapel Hill. Do you think in 4 weeks she evaluated every argument for and against Christianity and made a rational decision it was false? No way. There's no way to do that in that period of time. I submit to you there was something else going on. See, most people are not on a truth quest or on a happiness quest. They're going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. And quite frequently, the elephant in the room on a college campus I found, in fact, I said this the other night at Chapel Hill, the elephant in the room is not evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. People don't want it.
So, why do we concern ourselves with providing a defense for the faith? Myself, I'm a Christian. And if you're a Christian, why does it matter? And one of the reasons is to remove intellectual stumbling blocks that hinder the faith. As I said, there is a growing number of people in this culture and society that will call themselves agnostics, meaning they don't think that there is enough evidence to support the belief in God. If the stumbling block in that case is intellectual, then obviously if there are evidences that we can present to show that there is a way to understand the evidence from an intellectual standpoint, from a logical standpoint, from a historical standpoint, then perhaps it will erode those stumbling blocks and lead to an understanding and agreement with the truthfulness of what we believe to be the good news, the gospel message of the Christian faith. And hopefully, as these seeds of intellectual evidence settle into somebody, perhaps it could lead to at least the possibility of that person being touched by the Spirit of God, and maybe begin at least a growing conviction in the truthfulness of the biblical message. Another reason is to help support and ground believers, Christian believers, in their faith, to give them that solid foundation that we are not following a blind faith, but we are following a faith that has a bedrock of history and reason and logic and lots of evidence behind it. And protect them from deception, as the speaker was just saying. He was alluding to and speaking primarily about college students. You could also talk about high school students. But obviously any one of us at any age, we are bombarded with secular messages from the culture and from the society. And by having a foundation of the evidence, it helps to give us kind of the armor and the shield against those attacks, if you will, and to silence the attacks of an unbelieving world. The secular culture is attacking the faith constantly through a variety of different means, and having the armor, having the foundation of evidence helps to guard against that, so that you won't fall prey to those attacks. So again, in this lesson, we're going to look at several lines of evidence that point to the existence of God. First one is the evidence of mankind's behavior, then the evidence of cause and effect, the evidence of intelligent design, the moral argument, and the evidence of the Bible itself. And I will have another lesson later on that talks much more specifically and much more detail about the Bible itself and the evidence for the veracity and the trustworthiness of the Scripture. Now, obviously, it should be noted and remembered that for those who are most staunch, most ardent, most militant in their stance as an unbeliever, as an atheist, whatever, no amount of evidence is going to be adequate for them. But for perhaps some people who would describe themselves as agnostics, possibly they would be open to at least listening to the different lines of evidence that exist. So as far as the evidence of mankind's behavior, the anthropological evidence, even amongst the most remote and primitive civilizations, there has been and there is a belief in some kind of a supreme being. This has been true since time began. And obviously we know, that there are a lot of different understandings of who that supreme being is, and what he's all about and so forth, and whether he's approachable or not, whether he's personal or not, or whatever. But overwhelmingly down through the ages and even today through almost every civilization, there is this belief in their being. Human beings seem to have this within them, to believe in some form of a supreme being. So it would, I think, be fair to conclude that mankind is inherently worshipful, inherently has a belief built within them, within us, to believe in a supreme being. And so it's widespread and has been so, as I said, since the dawn of time. From Ecclesiastes, this is from the scripture: he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. So there is this belief inherent in man, but to get a full understanding, it has to go beyond just this kind of esoteric belief, if you will. Blaise Pascal described it as a God-shaped vacuum that exists in the heart of every man and woman. And the vast majority of mankind, down through time, all over the world, has believed in God in some form, as I said. Where there is no God, there will always be a vacuum in the soul. And this again refers back to what Blaise Pascal described, and that if they don't fill it with God, they will fill it with something else. Cause and effect. If something exists now, something must have always existed. This is an argument from logic. The fact that anything exists now, something must have, or someone must have always existed. You can continue to trace any object back. I can hold a pencil up and say, I can trace it back to the wood and the lead and the rubber and so forth, but then where did that come from, and then where did that come from? You can continue to trace any solid object and go backwards, or really any object, and eventually you're going to get to a point where it has to have had a beginning. And if anything had a beginning, then something must have an eternal existence in order for anything to have existed in the first place. And this goes to the point that if there had ever been absolute nothingness, nothing could ever have existed or been created. Think about that. If there had ever been absolute nothingness, if there had ever been a time where literally nothing existed, then nothing could ever have existed or been created. Any piece of created reality proves the existence of an eternal, transcendent, and let's just say a transcendent being, an eternal and transcendent being, because there could never have been absolute nothingness. Therefore, something must exist or have existed inherently and not been created. So let's take a look at another.
I think we all agree that for everything that exists, there must be an antecedent cause to it, whether that's my own birth or the cake that was given to me for my birthday present, or, whatever. The car that I'm driving, which I'm delighted with at the present time. I know that it didn't just show up. It wasn't a result of randomness plus time, that there was a designer, there was a manufacturing process, there was a shipping process. And so it seems to me that cause is intuitive for things that really exist in the universe.
And now we are living in a time where this argument really has gained a lot of momentum today, because the accepted view in science today is that the universe, time and energy and matter and all that, all came into existence at a finite time in the past. Now, if that is true, they have not always existed. They do point to a reality beyond just the physical, and that reality has to have certain characteristics. Has to be timeless because it created time, immaterial because it created space, extremely powerful, if not all powerful, because of the nature, the vastness of the universe, and it also has to be extremely intelligent given the complexity of the universe. So what kind of a cause would this have to be?
Now, those who used to say the universe was infinite, has always existed, they argue that the universe itself is that primary cause. It's always been here. But ever since the Big Bang, we know that the universe hasn't always been here. And we can look at that in different ways. We can look at that through the redshift by noticing the Doppler effect in the universe around us. The universe had a beginning. Or we can look at it from a chemical argument using the second law of thermodynamics. We know that things move from a state of order to disorder. In order for the world to have as much order as it has today, it must have had a beginning in the past. If it were infinitely old, we would be at a point of infinite disorder. So there's different ways to point out the fact that there was a cause to this universe. And therefore we have to ask the question, what was that cause?
It's a mind over matter type of thing, yeah. Whether or not, is it in the beginning was the word, or in the beginning were the particles? And right now, the accepted view in science is that the particles were not in the beginning, they came into existence. And that just leaves the other option, which is a mind.
When you look at a personal creator like God, then you have an answer that not only answers the question of the beginning of the universe, it then answers all the other questions as well. The best, most coherent explanation that ties in all these facts and ties them in well is that God exists.
So I hope that helps to explain the cosmological argument. So anything that exists must be either self-created, self-existent, or created by something or someone eternal. The fact that anything exists, something is either self-created, inherently existent, self-existent, or created by something or someone else. Can anything be self-created? Logically, no. Nothing could make itself. For something to create itself, it would have to exist before it existed. It just does not make sense. Logically, you really just can't. You can't justify that kind of a belief. It's irrational and contradicting itself. Atheistic evolutionists point to chance as being behind created matter, but chance is it's a probability, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in a million, whatever. Chance is just a probability. It has no power in and of itself. Chance cannot create anything. Bottom line is nothing can be created by itself. Nothing can be self-created. So that option has to be wiped out. Self-existent. Some have contended and do contend that the universe has always existed and that it is self-existent. One of the speakers in the previous video presented that there are those who have at least said that, and there are some who would still maintain that. The problem is, and this is the position of the materialists, that the world itself, the universe, is eternal and therefore has its own power of inherent being. The problem is that we know from the laws of thermodynamics and science in general that matter is not eternal. And really, all of the scientific evidence consistently has demonstrated the fact that matter is not eternal, that it had, that obviously we believe that every material thing, including the entire universe, had a beginning at one point, that the matter of the universe is not in and of itself existent. It had to have been created. This is a quote from a NASA scientist: "The theory of an eternal universe is untenable. It doesn't hold water. The only viable option, therefore, is a creator." And again, in the Christian faith and other monotheistic faiths and so forth, we refer to this supreme being as God, the creator as God. Again, the only explanation for the existence of anything in this universe is that there is an eternal creator, an eternal supreme being. So it's only the existence of this eternal being explains the presence of the universe itself. The first cause. So as the first cause, so this creator, it must therefore be all wise, since obviously he was the first cause of wisdom. The fact that we have wisdom, that this was something that was created, means that the first cause of it had to be all wise. He created love, and therefore he must be loving. Clearly, he had to be all powerful. You hear the term in some circles, omnipotent, all powerful. Obviously, since he created the entire universe that we know of, he has to have enormous power. And again, because he created the entity of time, he has to be outside of it. You have to be outside of whatever you create. And then finally, he has to be outside the universe. Since he created the universe, he couldn't be contained within the universe that he created. So he is outside of it and therefore could create it. So there's the argument for God involving intelligence as well. So let's take a look at that.
The design argument for God's existence argues that there is an implicit and explicit design, order, purpose in creation that points to a creator, a purposer, a designer. You can't help but look at the existence of life on this earth and how strong the odds are, millions and millions to one, that everything aligned just perfectly.
Scientists are telling us today that life in this universe is balanced on a knife's edge. There are about, maybe I think about 50 constants of nature, and if they were changed to the slightest degree imaginable, life would not be possible. And they are independent of each other, all these constants. And for them to have been put together, for them to have come together to allow life, seems to cry out for intelligence, for intelligence behind the whole process.
How far the Earth is from the sun, it seems to be just the perfect distance. How far is the moon from the Earth? It seems to be just the perfect distance for life to begin existing. Where exactly are we in our galaxy Our galaxy is the Milky Way. We happen to find ourselves in just the right place for just the right amount of radiation to allow life to exist. Where are we in our solar system? It turns out we're being shielded by an asteroid belt, something we would need in order for life to exist. Gravity has a wide range of constants where it could have been. It could have been one way, it could have been an entirely different way. And in fact, if we took the entire range of constants where gravity could have been set, and we turned that range into a ruler that expands the length of the universe, and we divide that up in 1-inch increments, so we're talking about a ruler, the length of the universe at 1-inch increments, gravity is exactly where it needs to be in order for life to exist. If it were 1 inch one way, everything would explode. If it were 1 inch the other way, everything would implode. We're talking about gravity could have been anywhere on that ruler, this cosmic ruler. And so we have to conclude the best explanation, again, is that mind, which we have good reason to believe through the intelligent design argument, is tampering with this dial in order for life to exist.
I think the beauty of art, the beauty of, say, the Grand Canyon of the Swiss mountains, or the intricacies of nature, including the way that everything holds together to sustain and validate life or sustain life, are so complex that, to me, I just cannot accept that could be purely random chance and necessity. I really, that takes more faith in my mind than to believe that there's a cosmic intelligence with goodness, power, and grace who designed something in which people made in his image could live.
What the intelligent design movement is saying is that we can identify messages in the world around us. We have the ability to say, okay, this message right here has come from an intelligent mind. Then we take what we've learned, we apply it to the world around us, and we say, wow, this world is the product of a mind. This isn't smuggling theism through the back door. This is just a fact. If we can determine that a mind is involved, and we see that a mind is involved in the universe around us, that's the conclusion. And we should take our conclusions and run with them, not try to predetermine what our conclusions should be. That's bad science.
So again, the design argument, which I believe we see all around us, can be empirically, I think, proven. There's a trail that goes from behind my house and goes down through the woods and so forth. And I take this walk with my dog all the time. And we come upon a creek that we have to cross every time we go. And you might say that there are 2 bridges across. On the left, you'll see a picture of a tree that has fallen over the creek, and we certainly could walk across that tree. But maybe 20 yards down the creek, there's the bridge on the right. Now, I think even a first grader would be able to look at these 2 bridges and tell me and tell us which one just randomly happened and which one required intelligence, required a designer, required a builder, required a creator. Even if I were to put a pile of the boards and the nails and everything on the ground there and right next to the creek, I don't think any rational human being would surmise that any natural force of wind or rain or lightning or anything would have resulted in the bridge on the right happening. Any rational mind would look at that and conclude that that bridge on the right, that structure on the right, required a creator. The one on the left could be argued that, well, just random chance could have caused that to happen. So let's take it a step further. And the most obvious one is the human body. The human body is incredibly complex. I have an allied medical background, took a lot of anatomy and physiology and so forth, and I can tell you, and anybody who has studied the human body knows how incredibly complex it is. even a single cell, which we really didn't understand until the last century, how complex just a single cell, human cell is, and the ingenious machinery that is contained in the cell, the organs of the body and how they work independently and how they work as a complex. The structure of the protein molecule, again, at least a relatively recent discovery. RNA and DNA, if you've studied it at all, you know how complex it is. The mechanism of the blood clotting system, that if you cut your finger, cut your arm, cut anything on your body, that your blood system, there are cells in your blood system that actually cause it to stop bleeding. The fact that the body is able to heal and repair itself. We as humans have not been able to create anything as intelligent and as ingenious as many scientists are. We have not been able to create a machine or anything that is able to repair itself, while our bodies do. So if you go back and think about the evidence of the bridge across the creek and how simple that is, and we know, as I said, even a first grader would be able to tell you that somebody built that bridge. How you could then look at the human body and say, well, that it just happened over millions and billions of years without a designer, without a creator, without a maker, really doesn't pass the logic test and the reason and rationality test. Another part of the trail that I'm on, I passed by the structure on the left, which apparently used to be a house in the woods. Well, all that is it's a stack of stones with mortar in between. Again, nobody would look at that, walk by it, and think, wow, look what just evolved in that spot. No one, even if I put all the rocks on the ground and put the sand and everything that was needed for the mortar or the cement and laid it there on the ground, nobody in their right mind would think that any natural force of wind, rain, lightning, whatever, would result in that structure on the left just naturally occurring, that wall, those walls. And yet there are those who would argue that the human body there, that's just obviously an anatomical chart, that just happened. It just happened over time without any kind of intelligence behind it. Again, I just don't see how that argument could hold up to reason and logic. Here's a quote from Sir Fred Hoyle. As biochemists discover more and more about the awesome complexity of life, it is apparent that its chances of originating by accident are so minute that they can be completely ruled out. Life cannot have arisen by chance. There had to have been a creator behind it, a designer. The universe itself, we're going beyond just talking about the human body, shows great order and design, as one of the speakers in the previous video talks about. If you have the opportunity to study it, that all the different things in the universe, and of course about the earth, it shows enormous amounts of design and provides evidence for a creator, all the exact conditions that had to be necessary in order to create it. And I'm talking about the universe, but certainly also the earth, to sustain it, to have life begin on any planet, the conditions that had to be adhered to, as the speaker said, on a knife's edge or on a razor's edge, for all the different conditions to converge so that life was possible on any planet. And then not only for life to be created, but for it to be sustained the way that it is on the planet Earth. All of that points to a designer, a grand designer, and a creator. A quote from W.R. Bird, who wrote the book, The Origin of the Species Revisited. Evolution can neither produce nor explain so many improbable special conditions, and their abrupt appearance seems much more likely to many scientists, as opposed to lengthy over time things coming to be. And of course, the term abrupt appearance is a euphemism for creation by God. And again, I'm not going to get into length of time and all that kind of that argument, but I will argue for a creator, that all the things that we see in our universe and on our earth point to very, very specifically the fact that there is a creator. Then there's the moral argument. C.S. Lewis described right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe. Now, what did he mean by that? Well, there seems to be a force inside all of us. It seems to be pervasive in virtually all cultures for us to act in a certain way, generally speaking. Even those in very primitive cultures seem to have this, and there seems to be a relatively common set of morals. And so there is this universal appeal to a common sense of right and wrong through virtually all cultures. There may be modest differences, but there does seem to be a core of beliefs that seems, again, to be inherent in mankind about the way things ought to be, about right and wrong. And so there is this implied standard for behavior that is shared in virtually all cultures. And so, again, we see this in virtually all civilizations, and this has been true down through the ages as well, with some variation, but there is a core that seems to be a consensus. So the evidence from the moral argument, there seems to be someone who created the universe, as we said, from the design argument, and he would be then the first moral cause, the moral first cause, as we were talking about the first cause argument. The fact that morals exist inherently through mankind, and we've already talked about the design argument, the rationale for there being a creator. Therefore, if there's a creator and there's this inherent morality in mankind, it would point to him being the first cause of this morality. And it also seems he put that moral law within us. Going back to Blaise Pascal and the God-shaped vacuum, there's this inherent belief in God. There is this commonality of morality, of what ought to be, of what right and wrong is. It all points, all of this evidence converges on the fact, in my view at least, that there is a supreme being who is the first cause of this morality. So let's take a look at, this is Sean McDowell, Dr. Sean McDowell, and he will talk about the moral law.
Is there really such a thing as right from wrong? Does the existence of universal morality point towards God, or can morality just be explained by, say, evolution? Well, I actually think one of the most compelling arguments for the existence of God is the existence of objective moral values. It has two premises and a conclusion. It goes like this: if objective moral values exist, God must exist. Objective moral values exist, therefore, God must exist. That's it. So let's look at the first premise. If objective moral values exist, God must exist. Well, what is it about objective morality that requires God, or divine grounding, so to speak? Well, morals aren't part of the physical world. You can't weigh them like you can a rock or a glass of water. They seem to be immaterial or spiritual. They contain information, tell the truth, do right, be faithful, and information comes from a mind. And for there to really be a real right and wrong, there needs to be a source outside of human beings. Otherwise, it's just your opinion versus mine. So if there are real moral values and duties, it sure seems to point towards the existence of a moral lawgiver, towards a God. So then the question is, how do we know moral values exist, that values and duties are really objective? Well, one way we know this is it's just obvious. It's obvious. Every one of us knows that torturing an innocent baby for fun is wrong. We simply know it. If somebody doesn't see that that's wrong, that person needs a therapist, not an argument. And by the way, when someone says, yeah, I don't believe there's right and wrong, C.S. Lewis is right, that person will contradict themselves in a matter of time. So I often tell my students, I'll say, if someone tells you there's no such thing as right and wrong, cut in front of them and lying. What are they going to say? That's not fair, that's not right, as if there's really an objective moral standard we're both accountable to. The other thing C.S. Lewis points out in his book, The Abolition of Man, is that across cultures universally throughout history, there are certain moral truths that people are committed to. Things like courage, things like faithfulness, mercy, caring for posterity. Now, the practice of those moral principles may vary, but there are universal moral truths that people are committed to. So if objective moral values exist, God must exist. Objective moral values exist. Therefore, God must exist. The existence of a real right and wrong is one compelling reason to believe that there is a source for that right and wrong, the character of God himself. There's a moral law because there's a moral law giver.
So, this creator that we're talking about. So having put the moral law within us, as Sean McDowell, Dr. McDowell was just explaining, and as I was talking about earlier, so he would be, obviously, if he placed this moral law within us, he would be very interested in right conduct, fair play, unselfishness, courage, good faith, honesty, truthfulness. Again, these attributes are virtually universal through all cultures and through all time. And so, again, this all points back to the fact that this is so universal and so broadly accepted in virtually all cultures, points back to there being a creator and a personal creator and a creator who has established a moral law. So starting to wrap up now. So what are the barriers to belief? Well, there's a moral barrier. For some, the barrier to the accepting of the existence of God is a moral one, because if one accepts the existence of God, they must acknowledge an obligation exists to obey that God and what that God says relative to the moral law. And these people are unwilling to do so, so they simply reject the existence of God at all costs, because they do not want to put themselves in a position that they need to obey that God. There is a spiritual barrier. Now, the Bible describes the individual who does not believe in God as spiritually dead. And as a result, these individuals are literally incapable of responding to God because they are spiritually dead. And these people need to be drawn, or you'll hear the term quickened or softened to respond, which is something only God can do, to quicken, make them spiritually alive so that they can respond. So let's sum it up. So mankind has a very strong inherent proclivity to believe in a supreme being, as we talked about first. The universe cannot be self-created or self-existent. Science does not make room for that. Therefore, it really points to only one possibility, and that is that the universe must have been created by a supreme being of some kind. The Supreme Being must be all wise, all loving, all powerful, outside of time and outside of his creation, since he's the first cause for all of that. Since he's the one that created these things, created the existence of these things, he has to be outside of those things. As we saw, the human body is so complex that a supremely intelligent creator must have designed it. Again, going back to the examples that I gave of just the simple bridge and the simple wall, and how any one of us, any rational person from the age of 3 on upward would know that those simple structures required a creator. And so certainly you can easily, very easily extrapolate then that the universe and all the things that we see, and in particular for me at least, the human body itself cries out for the fact that there had to have been an extraordinarily intelligent creator. The universe itself is so vast and complex with a myriad of conditions needed in order to permit life that its existence and ours is very sound evidence for God as creator. And certainly I would invite you to study this as well as so many of the other topics more deeply, to see again all the different conditions that had to converge in order for the universe to exist, for the earth to exist, and for life to spring up upon it. There is a moral consensus, as we wrapped up with, a standard of what ought to be, of what right and wrong should be, and plus those commonly sought after virtues that we listed. And of course, that was not an exhaustive list, that again points to the fact that there is a moral lawgiver who imputed in us this law. And again, that points back to a supreme being who is moral in and of himself. This sense of having been universally imprinted in the heart of men and women is evidence for the existence of a personal God, the fact that he would be personally interested in what we do and how we behave, and imparting in us those moral laws. And again, as I said, I will look in the future. You can look for other lessons where I will look much more closely, spend a full hour looking at the Bible and some other proofs for God's existence. So I hope this has helped. I think that there are some very strong arguments that can be made that point to the existence of God. And for those who are in your world, who may be agnostic and maybe at least open to a rational discussion, I think some of these points are very powerful and I think are very compelling as well. So God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. And